What's going on, guys? Junior's Fishing Company with a spin on a classic. Now, to some people, I might be totally insulting your traditional fly tying. I apologize. I got a comment a while back, and it's kind of been in the back of my head, and I can't remember who it was. If it was you, drop a comment below. And it was kind of making a variation of like a Davie McPhails woolly bugger called the Humongous, or he had a couple different names for it in the video. And I watched the video a couple times in the last few days, thinking of different variations to do. And I haven't really tied a ton of woolly buggers because I don't fly fish a ton. I do a little bit of dry fly fishing. I throw some streamers occasionally, but I just primarily use spinning tackle, bait casters, and stuff like that. So the Humongous woolly bugger that Davie McPhails, whatever, tied was just a traditional woolly bugger. He had the marabou tail. He put some flash in, hackle wraps over tinsel or something like that, and then he did silver bead chain eyes. And I wanted to keep some of those elements in this, but I also wanted to change it enough where it wasn't me just tying a woolly bugger on a 1/4 ounce jig head. So what I did was I did black marabou tail. I mean, it's not a woolly bugger without some sort of tail like that. Instead of kind of veiling back that flash, I added just a single strip of silver lateral scale. The reason I did that is because I went through quite a bit of the woolly bugger hackle that I've got, and it wasn't, I mean, you can't wrap hackle over chenille. And so I thought the chenille could kind of replace that hackle. So what I did was I wrapped just some sparkle braid. This is just black mini. I didn't have anything bigger than the mini. I would have used like a medium or a large, but I didn't have it. So you'll see in the video, so I wrapped down that black sparkle braid just to show a little bit of color, a little contrast to that pearl. And then I wrapped that pearl medium chenille. This is just kind of, your run-of-the-mill Palmer chenille. I just touched wrapped all the way up, and then I took a little Schlappen feather and I wrapped around it because I found that the chenille, it was just going to be too flashy of a bait. It was going to be super flashy, and so I just kind of veiled this again, and just another hackle wrap. I was trying to stick with some of the classic elements of a woolly bugger, so I wrapped some black hackle there too, just to kind of match the tail. And I've got these 1/4 ounce jig heads. So I powder coated this just in some Do It mold powder paint. I think this is the color chrome. And that's kind of to match those silver bead chain eyes that he used. Again, I tried to keep some of those elements in it. I ended up tying a couple different patterns. I'll show you at the end the couple other ones that I've done, and maybe some other ideas that I've got. I've got a bunch of chenille, so you could definitely change this up a ton. But the Davie McPhails Humongous woolly bugger jig. Before we start tying, like and subscribe. Drop a comment below. Anything you want to see, ideas that you've got, let me know. Let's tie it up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in my strip of lateral scale, and I'm just going to tie that in I'm right at the barb of the hook, and I'm just going to tie that in right on my side. I just want to do a couple loose wraps. This is super slippery stuff, and I'm going to tie that in. It sometimes doesn't want to sit where you want. It can be a little more finicky than you think, getting that right on the side, and hopefully that's going to stay there. In the original Humongous, McPhails had just some flash on top, and I'm going to cover most of it up with my marabou. I've got 2 little stacks of marabou here. in the original that he tied, I don't know if I don't think he might have been the first person to do it, but he measured it out kind of like 2 shank lengths for the marabou. And I really don't even have marabou that's going to be that long. And I don't want it to be that long anyway, because otherwise it'd be a lot past my hook. So I'm really just going to put this marabou in full length. I'm going to kind of trim off the crud. And I'm just going to put one little bit. This is actually more than a little. It's quite a bit. But I'm going to put that in right on top. But I'm going to kind of separate it out. I'm just going to push down to separate that, hopefully on about the half of my hook. And I'm going to put a little bit more on the bottom just to kind of get full coverage. And I want that lateral scale to be completely covered by marabou. The only part of that lateral scale that you're going to be able to see is going to be kind of just like a little shimmering tail. So I'm going to get this. I have my second stack. This is a really thin one. And I'm just going to separate it about like this. And then I can kind of just feed that on or in between my hook and get that pushed up. And that should, if I can get all my marabou, that should kind of get me where I need to be in terms of covering up that lateral scale. Not that it matters a ton, but I'm already going to have so much flash in here with my chenille wraps that I don't need a ton more flash. I just wanted to do a couple things like he did, and he had some flash in that tail. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of look where my marabou ends, and I'll go maybe, I don't know, that's probably a 1/4 of an inch longer. So there's just going to be that little kind of silver tail right at the back, and then I can get ready for my next steps. So I've got my chenille and my sparkle braid. I'm going to tie in my chenille first. You always tie in first what you're going to wrap last. And I'm going to get that right back to my marabou. And then I'll tie my sparkle braid in. I would have used, this is the mini. I probably said that before, but this is the mini. I would have used like a medium, but I don't have it because sparkle braid, I use it on smaller flies. I just want a little bit of black underneath this chenille. When this chenille gets wet, it's going to mat down. And I just want a little dark contrast under that pearl chenille. And I'm using white thread, so if I didn't add anything, it would just be, I mean, it'd be fine, but it would be a lot of white. And I want just a little bit of color variation in this body. So I'm going to wrap back and forth a couple times with my 210. This is 210 white. I'm going to wrap a couple times back and forth just to build up a little more body, and then we'll wrap this stuff. So I added just a little bit more body, not a ton. I could have done a few more wraps, but I really don't want to make this too bulky of a bait. I want it, this chenille is going to do its job and add a lot of bulk. I'm going to just use my rotary tool so you don't have to watch me spend 10 minutes wrapping this sparkle braid. I'm just doing touching wraps all the way up, or as close as I can get. Now that my hook, I keep my sparkle braid and stuff like that, you can see I'm holding the spool and just letting it spin off because I'm going to use a lot of sparkle braid, and I just hate to waste stuff like this. It's not expensive. It's only a couple bucks, but this sparkle braid stuff should last you forever. And the less you waste, the longer it's going to last. And it's just easy just to hold onto the spool. You don't have to guess how much you need, and you have 3 inches extra, and what are you going to do with 3 inches? Or you get 80% of the way there and you need to add another. It's just easier to use the spool. So I'll get that tied off all the way up. Get that out of the way. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to unwind my chenille off my material clip, and I'm just going to wind this all the way up, and I'm going to do pretty tight wraps. This medium chenille is not necessarily like super bulky, so I'm not worried about, you know, if this was a dubbing brush or something like that where you add so much bulk so quick. It's pretty thin and it lays down really well. And so this is basically to be that flash, but what I was thinking is this is kind of my synthetic hackle is what I'm thinking. Instead of doing a hackle wrap, because I wanted to make this a little bit different. I mean, I could have just copied exactly what he did in the video and put it on a jig head, but really that's not different. So in my head, this is my hackle, and you can kind of see a little bit of that black through the pearl, and I think once it gets wet, you're really going to be able to tell more, especially when it's wet. Just want to make sure I get as much of that pushed back as I can, otherwise I'm just wrapping over it. It's a lot of wrapping. I don't want to use my rotary function on this though, because again I'll wrap over. And you don't have, I'm doing touching wraps. You could easily space these out a little more, or you could space them out at first and get closer as you go up to maybe make a little bit of more of a body. And you could also trim this like a game changer too. But you'll see in just a sec, or you saw at the beginning too, I'm adding some hackle up in the front of this, or some Schlappen up in the front of this. I'm going to go all the way up, and I have just enough medium chenille, just a couple extra inches. So I'm going to go one more really tight, push all that back, get a couple tight wraps with my thread, then I'll trim off the couple inches that I have left. I got lucky. And I'm just going to create a little bit of a collar right here, just kind of a wrapping lane for my hackle. So I've got just a black Schlappen. I've gone back and forth with black or gray. The eyes that he had, I think they were bead chain. I don't think they were dumbbell. The bead chain eyes he used were silver, so I painted this silver. And so I didn't want to do too much gray, and so I ended up just doing black. And this is just a Schlappen feather that I normally wouldn't even put on like a bass or a muskie jig anyway. And I have a ton of these, so it's always nice to use stuff that you haven't really found ways to use yet. And I'll just get a couple tight wraps on there. It's a really thin stem, so I want to do a few wraps and make sure that it's down. Then I'm going to come in with my nice dull scissors as close as I can and trim that off. Just to keep my thread out of the way, I put it on my cradle, and I really don't, I'm definitely not going to get my hackle pliers. I just need to be pretty delicate with this, but I do want to be kind of careful with breaking this stem. And I can just start right on the edge of that chenille. And I'm just going to work my way toward my collar. And however thick this gets is how thick it gets. I'm not too worried about a really thin collar or a really thick one. I just want to cover up, I want to dull out some of that chenille because it is a lot of flash. I'm just going to wrap right up to my head. And I'm going to use this whole feather. So I'll come back down around one last time, just to about right there. I can get my thread back. Then I'll tie off this stem, trying not to wrap too much of my hackle in the process. Maybe 3, maybe 4 wraps. It's not going to add too much bulk anyway. Trim off my little stem, then I'll fold this back and just make a little white collar. So I'm going to fold this back, and I've got my little eyelash curler, which works great when you want to separate these individual fibers out. And then I can really just get my whip finish tool. I'll be able to easily whip finish on something like this. I'll give it 2, 3, maybe 4 turns. Put a little head cement down, and that is your humongous jig variation. So it's definitely different than the traditional woolly bugger for sure. And again, I wanted to do something a little bit different. And this is the 4th or 5th one I've tied. I've got 2 other ones sitting here. So this is the exact one that I made right before, because I've just been experimenting around with what color jig head I wanted. I started with an all black, but I kind of thought, well, maybe I should stick with the silver that he had in the head. And I had this black and silver jig that I'll probably tie one more, and I'll tie it on this. But you've got your classic marabou tail, you've got your hackle wrap, and again, I just wanted to dull out some of that flash. And when this gets wet, these feathers are gonna cover up a lot of that flash. Not all of it. You can see there's definitely some gaps in there. And so that flash is going to get through plenty. And then you've just got a little bit of kind of like a silvery, flashy tail in there. But the humongous jig. Junior's Fishing Company. Like and subscribe. Leave more comments. This was a lot of fun sitting here for an hour or 2 trying to figure out what to do. Drop a comment below, something you'd want to see. It probably won't be exactly what you're thinking. If you were to tie something like this, I'm sure you would think of creative ways to do it too. So that's what this whole channel's about. We'll see you on the next one.